But the news in Meath, gentlemen, is that I seem to have almost as good a chance of getting elected as either of yourselves, you having the advantage having declared yourselves. But Francis, the Greens 66 to 1.
Yeah. They're tight odds. But to be honest, I've been out in the doors, I've been canvassing, and the response has been remarkably positive. I know we suffered quite badly a few years ago, but the turnaround has been quite miraculous in terms of the people I'm meeting on the doorsteps. A lot of people have had time to think over the last 2 years. They've had time to judge how the current government has been trying to fix our economic woes, and they see more of the same in many ways. And
but Jews were part of the same.
Well, in fairness, we weren't, Sam, because even though we were in government when the economic collapse happened, the seeds of that had been set the previous decade. The property market, for instance, peaked in early 2007, and that was before the Greens were in government. The Greens certainly were in a fortunate position in having to deal with it and make unpleasant choices and unpopular choices, but I certainly don't accept that we were part of the problem. We rallied against the whole boom-bust culture, the whole...
Yeah, but you weren't there at the time of the bank bailout, like you were in the room, weren't you?
Well, certainly we were part of that government, certainly, but you know, when you're in government you have to make unpopular decisions sometimes, and it's a case of you can choose between economic chaos or you can choose between that and stability, and sometimes you have to go for stability as a responsible choice.
It's looking good for direct democracy as far as you're 25 to 1 chance according to Paddy Power, so you're...
Considering we started at
more than twice as much chance.
Yeah, well, considering we started at 100 to 1 last week, Sam, we seem to be going in the right direction and very fast. Yeah. Direct democracy is growing quite well around the country. We only launched just before Christmas, but the idea of it really appeals to the people on the doors, because the people feel disenfranchised from the government. They don't feel the government represents them, and really the truth of the matter is the government does not represent the people. And there's real hurt and real pain out there. Like before they would say to you, oh, there's pain, this was cut and that was cut. But now you actually have, like a school teacher told me the other day, that she has noticed some children in school and they're actually, you know, asking others for some of their lunch. It has gone that bad. There's 2 suicides a day in the country. That means before the election now there'll be 15 people dead before the election. From suicide.
That's not the most upbeat campaigning that I've heard of.
No, it's not. But so the upbeat part, I mean, that's the disaster we are in now, and that's why people feel disenchanted. That's why there's anger on the door. So what we're getting on the door is that people are basically about to run you from the door until you say, we're a new political party.
I'm not a politician.
Yes, well, I'm not a politician, thank God. But the thing about direct democracy is it gives everybody a say.
But what's the difference between you and running as an independent?
OK, I could have ran as an independent. It would have been a much easier route for me. But I took the more difficult decision to set up a political party, not because there's such a void for one in Ireland at the minute, but I wanted to set up one that would make real change. So I could have done it the easy way, but independents don't really have a say. And that's the feedback we were getting, that independents' vote is a wasted vote. So with direct democracy, what direct democracy does is it basically gives the power of a referendum back to the people. We've had it in our first constitution until they removed it, and one would have to ask why it was removed from the constitution.
Is there an organisation that would run to other constituencies right around the country?
Oh, there is, yeah. Direct democracy, Donegal is set up. Direct democracy, Carlow was setting up. Direct
it's like a franchise, then?
Yeah, well, more or less. I mean, but that's democracy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But at least people feel they have a say and that their voice will be heard. So if you want to bail out the banks, you ask the people.
Seán, you got it very hard in the night. Not as hard, by the way, as your colleagues did last week from Vincent Browne, who was sat here. Are there any particular green issues in Meath that you could think of?
Well, a lot of the problems in Meath East are the boom time problems, and those
but
problems.
Everybody wanted the motorways or something.
Well, I'm not talking about the motorways. I'm talking about in terms of building thousands of houses with absolutely no facilities. The problems that go with that. We have electricity brownouts, lack of water, lack of clean water, sewage problems, and these are all problems that we have to deal with them now. Obviously, the ones that the legacy that we're left with. But we also have to make sure this stuff doesn't happen again, because I think in some ways that's one of the big failings of the current government. In many ways, they seem like they want to rewind back to 2007 and just continue as usual. They want the economic crisis to go away.
See, a lot of people probably were you not a bit of an add-on luxury during the boom years, as sort of conscience things? Oh yeah, you know, it really would be nice to be green. But then when the money goes, people's conscience sort of leaves them too.
Well, I wouldn't say we were just a boom time. Maybe we weren't very good in communicating our message in some ways, no, but I certainly think the green philosophy is the ultimate one for the future. I mean, the fact is we have to get away from this boom-bust economic cycle that we're in.
Except when you went against the motorways in Meath. I mean, I can remember a lot of people in Meath wanted to get to Dublin or wherever to go to their work.
That's fair enough, but you'll also find now in County Meath there's lots of people raging about the fact that the M3 is being subsidised by the state as part of the public-private partnership that built it, and the fact that as tax, not only are they paying 2 tolls on it, but they actually have to...
They mightn't like the way it's organised, but they still want a quick road to get to where they're going.
That's an issue. I mean, we're all for development, but we say it has to be done properly, it has to be properly planned, has to be properly thought out, and the fact is we had lots of development in this country and we were told development is good for jobs, and development is good for jobs, but it has to be the right type of development, it has to be well thought out, or it will create social problems.
Well, Meath, never being a backwater now, is always have your eye on the world. Tell me, what do you think of what's going on in Cyprus at the moment?
Well, I think Europe has been run by people who do not respect democracy, the rule of law, or the basic principles on which the Western civilization was built.
Well, Greece now, they had a lot to do with starting it, didn't they?
Yeah, maybe they did, but I mean...
Democracy now, they did...
yes, the Greeks did, yes. Yeah. But what I'm saying is that the Troika and the such like are not democratic. I mean, I think Europe is secretive and undemocratic. There's no question about it. I mean...
Although their money's very useful. You know, every year when we need it to pay the nurses and the doctors and so on.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, like at the same time, you have the Troika lending us money to bail out Troika banks. I mean, that's a crazy situation. I mean, the banks created the mess. They broke liquidity laws all over this country, and the only people paying are the actual taxpayers, if you like.
That's true, and there was no government holding them to account.
No, there was no moral liability.
I'll just ask Seán about that. You know, Seán, because one of the problems of having been in government is that everybody's going to hold it up and say, yes, there was no regulation in the banks, but you guys were in government at the time, and the government did not hold the financial institutions or the banks to account.
Well, in many ways, the first few years of dealing with the economic crisis were just, it was a fire, you know, it was an exercise in putting out fires. It was just an attempt to stop absolute economic collapse in many ways. I mean, the legacy...
No, but before that, they turned their head when banks were doing appalling things.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, that's the unfortunate thing. You know, the huge credit flows that came when we entered the euro specifically, and you know, there were economists warning us about this. You can watch stuff on the internet and YouTube,
Absolutely.
news back from, you know, the early 2000s where they were screaming at us saying this is going to go badly, and people were like, politicians specifically weren't listening, and that's the big problem.
You guys were in government at that time, and the ultimate sanction you have is you can stand up and say, that's it, this is not going to last, we're going to walk if you don't do something about that.
Well, we certainly did our best in terms of trying to make sure that the cutbacks, for instance, that were made were as fair as possible. I mean, certainly the SRI observed, for instance, that the cuts made during that period, in our period in government, were much more equitable compared to the cuts that were made.
That's the same thing that the Labour Party is saying in the current government. What I suppose people would say is that you didn't do anything when you had an opportunity to stop the excesses that were going on, and the fact that there was no regulation whatsoever, and that the central bank was not up to doing
Well, as I said to you, Sam, we only entered government in 2007. The whole build-up to the crash had been built up over a decade. As I said, the property market had peaked in early 2007. We know this from the statistics we have. And there was no magic wands the Greens could wave to stop the economic crash from happening. The only thing we could be was part of the solution when it actually hit. Because clearly, you know, things like, as I said, you know, there were bad economic policies in Ireland, but they had its international context, and that has to be considered, that there was a limited amount you can do when you're completely dependent on foreign credit flows. And you can only deal, you know, we can deal in ideal world solutions, but you have to deal with the situation you're in, and you only do the best job that you can with it, and that's what we did, I believe.
Well, you might have heard there in the background a lot of rustling and bustling. That was me shuffling paper and losing all your tweets and calls and so on. But anyway, that's all for tonight. For more on tonight's show, you log on to tv3.ie. The weather's next, so from us tonight, good night.